Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you guys are. Welcome to our week 3 Q&A coaching session. I am so grateful you are here. I'm so grateful that you are showing up for yourself during this challenge. It has been absolutely incredible watching you guys and, watching you guys cheer each other on. It's been so amazing. So thank you guys for coming. Thank you guys for playing full out. I know some of you guys are joining live. Some of you guys are watching the replay. Regardless, thank you for being here. Just a quick note, we're going to give people a couple more minutes for those that are running behind to join live. But as always, I'm here as your guide, as your coach. Nothing I say or share should be taken as medical advice because, of course, I don't know you. I don't know your specific situation. So anything new you're unsure of as it pertains to you should always talk to your medical team. Otherwise, I'm here to cheer you on and support you in any way that I can. And today we're going to be talking all about the problem. And not the problem, but like one of the biggest problems that is affecting our health as a society. And really a lot of the things that I'm passionate about trying to address because so many of them are lifestyle related. So before we kick it off, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a question for you because like I told you guys last week, reflection and celebration are so important. Most of us don't take the time to celebrate ourselves. And so before we get started for tonight, I am going to bring this question up and I want you to think about it either in your head or actually take the time to write it down. What are 3 things that you are proud of for yourself since starting this challenge? And it could be something super silly as participating in the WhatsApp group or the Facebook group, or it could be something really big and amazing, like you've lost inches around your waist, or you've lost weight, or you have more energy, or whatever it is. Name 3 things. So before we kick it off, let's start there. All right, my friends, thank you guys for being here. Officially welcome to our week 3 coaching call. I am watching the chat here as well as Trisha. So thank you guys for being here. Tina is saying I feel energized about being able to actually achieve my weight goal this year. I am so excited for you, Tina. You are just amazing. Like, I've seen how much you've been traveling and doing all the things you've been doing. And despite that, you've stayed consistent with the system, which was the only thing that we had talked about doing when we had met in November. And I'm so proud of you because you've seen such great success despite all the travel and the chaos, just being consistent with this one thing. And it just goes to show, you and I both know, right? The power of consistency and staying committed. So I love you for that. It is so amazing. You are such a beautiful role model of what is possible. And of course, Minnie is my the love of my life. So there you go. She's always just showing up and showing us what's possible, despite having had so many health challenges and so many things that she's had to go through. She's just a shining light. So, all right, let's get started. So today we are going to talk about some of the main issues that we're dealing with as a society. And here's what I want you to remember. Some of this sometimes can sound really disempowering, but I really hope that what you guys take away from this is nothing but empowerment. Because once you know what we're dealing with, then you can take the right steps to really take back your health. And if you're taking back your health, you're then taking back your life, right? Because like we said during the first coaching call, like the potential to live out our lives to the fullest is only good if we have the body to do it. And not just the physical health, but the mental health, the emotional health. We need all of this vehicle that we've been given to live out the life that we want, right? And everything that we want in this life. And so here's what I believe. And Hippocrates, the father of medicine, actually said it too. Everyone has a physician inside of them. We just have to help it in its work, right? So everything we need to heal this body, whether we are, healthy right now or whether we're dealing with some health challenges, everything we need is already inside of us. And that's super empowering to know that our bodies are so resilient that if we give them, it's like a garden, right? Like if you give it water and nice fertilizer and all the good things, that those seeds are going to grow into beautiful flowers. Whereas if you don't water it and you don't give it the nutrients it needs, the weeds are going to grow and you're not going to have a beautiful garden. You're going to have a sick garden. And so our body is like a garden, right? And so if we give it what it needs, it will flourish. Okay. And here's the other thing I want you to take away from it, and take this from someone who has a genetic mutation. Okay. I know a lot of times we think diseases run in families, and they do, right? Diseases are complex. However, what I think is important to remember is that lifestyles also run in families, not just genes, right? Only 5 to 10% of most diseases are genetic or hereditary in nature. 70 to 80% of the chronic diseases that we're dealing with as a society today are actually preventable or related to our lifestyle, which means we have so much power, which is just incredible, right? And like I said, I think during our first call, remember, our lifestyle is like a seatbelt. It doesn't guarantee that nothing bad is going to happen in terms of a disease or getting sick, but it gives us our best chance. And that's what life is all about. It's about doing the things that are going to give you the best chance at living and thriving in this life. Okay. So let's look at this chart, and I'm going to kind of make this screen go big and small as we go through here. Think about any questions you have. We'll do a quick Q&A at the end, and think about any questions you have and put them in the chat, and we'll address them at the end. But this is going to be some jam-packed information here. Okay, so let me see here. 1 second. Here we go. All right. So this is the pandemic that nobody is talking about, right? Like, in 2020, with that virus, it came out of nowhere and it just took over the world. Like, everyone was talking about it, and that's all anyone's focus was on. This is the pandemic of chronic illness that has been going on for now a very long time, and it's slowly creeping up and getting worse with time, but nobody's really talking about it as much as we should, considering what it's doing to us as a society and how sick it's making us. So here's one thing I want you to look at: the chronic disease chart in the US. So 6 out of 10 Americans are living with one chronic disease. 4 out of 10 are living with 2 or more chronic diseases. What are these chronic diseases? Heart disease, kidney disease, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's, and more. And these are on the rise. These are within the top 10 diseases that are taking our lives, heart disease being the number one, right? And they're the leading causes of not just disease, but also disability and death. 38% of Americans are being diagnosed with cancer during their lifetime. Half of all Americans have cardiovascular disease. This is the one that gets me every time. 1 in 3 Americans have prediabetes, and 90% of them don't know they have it. And part of it is we don't know what prediabetes is. We don't know what insulin resistance is. We don't know what metabolic dysfunction and metabolic health is. And so those are some of the definitions that we're going to go through today. And then, of course, most of us are aware of the weight crisis that we have in this country. So 93% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. What determines our metabolic health? And if you have a pen, write it down. So our metabolic health is determined by our blood sugar or our blood glucose and how healthy that regulation is of our blood sugar, right? So then that would be really pre-diabetes would come in there. Our waist circumference, right? Our triglyceride levels, which are one of the bad types of fats. Our high HDL cholesterol, which is a type of good cholesterol, and then our blood pressure, right? And here's the thing that most of us don't realize is that most of these chronic illnesses that we see here, they're the end result, right? Most people think like, oh, I came into the hospital, I had a massive heart attack, but I was fine yesterday, but you weren't fine, right? So that's what's important to remember is that these diseases don't just happen overnight. It's a slow spectrum over decades of dysfunction. And it really comes down, the root cause comes down to metabolic dysfunction. Another way of saying that is insulin resistance. So think about right now in your inner circle, right? The maybe 10 or 15 closest people to you. How many of them, and you can put it in the chat if you want, how many of them can you think of that are overweight, that have high blood pressure or high cholesterol or heart disease or diabetes or are on medication for some sort of chronic illness like this? So think about it and put it in the chat. And what I want you to realize is that, if you put 100 kids in a class and 93 of those kids are failing, is there something wrong with the kids, or is it the system and the environment that they're in that's failing them, right? That's the key here. 93% of Americans, and this is now even a global pandemic, so this is affecting us globally, but 93% of the population of people are metabolically unhealthy, which means they have some issue with their blood sugar regulation, their blood pressure, their cholesterol, or their weight, okay? And it's not our fault. It's the environment that we're living in that's honestly making us sick. Tina is saying, yes, number two, at least 2 people. That's right. And here's what I want to tell you from my perspective as a palliative care doctor, okay? In America, and I know a lot of you don't live in America, but for those of us that live in America, we live in one of the richest countries in the world with the most advances in modern medical technology. Yet we are one of the countries, one of the one of the developed, out of the 10 developed countries, we are the country that has the sickest population that is young and not only getting sicker, I'm losing my words, not only getting sicker younger, but also dying younger, despite having all the advances in medical technology. That should really make you stop and think okay, how does that make any sense, right? We have all the medications, we have all the surgeries, we have all the injections, and yet out of all the developed nations, we're ranking the lowest in terms of how healthy we are. And it's not just about not having disease, right? It's about what disease takes away from us. And this is what I saw in my career as a palliative care physician. In those 10 years that I was working, taking care of people living with heart disease and kidney disease and cancer and Alzheimer's, it was what it did to those people, the suffering it caused in terms of symptoms, severe pain, shortness of breath, inability to walk, inability to get out of bed, no energy, wanting to sleep all the time, no appetite. Can you imagine putting yourself in the shoes of that person and living your life like that? And ask yourself, like, are you truly living in that scenario, or are you just existing? And that was the crisis for so many of my patients. Like, they were just existing, because now at this point, for most of these people, they didn't just have one disease, they had multiple diseases. Like I said, 60% of Americans are living with at least 2 or more chronic diseases, or 40%, sorry, 2 or more chronic diseases. And as we get older, one disease stacks on top of the next. And guess what? It's really expensive to be sick. It's really expensive. The amount of medications, the amount of doctor's visits, hospital visits, extra support that you need. And guess who else it affects when you get sick? Your family, right? Being a caregiver is extremely difficult. It leads to burnout. It affects you mentally, psychologically, emotionally. So when you're taking care of yourself and doing some of the things that you've been doing during this challenge, you're not just taking care of yourself, you're taking care of your family too. And it's the greatest investment, like I say, it's the greatest investment in you and the greatest investment in your family's quality of life down the road. If you guys have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the chat. So what does it mean then, right? Like, what I talked about chronic disease. And for me, it's like chronic disease needs to be given a new definition, because it's a chronic disease, not just at the end stage of the disease, which is what we think of it right now, right? Like, you have a disease once you have heart disease, or once you have kidney disease, or once you have dementia, or once you have cancer. But really, it should be much earlier in the spectrum when we're diagnosed with what I call silent killers. And all of these things, you see chronic disease in the middle there, all of these end stage conditions I just mentioned, and you see all of these things around it, right? Those are silent killers. I realize I'm not on the screen anymore. I don't know if you guys want to see me or not, so I'll come back. But like, those are silent killers right there, right? The high blood pressure, the high cholesterol, the chronic inflammation, the chronic stress, the excess weight, the prediabetes, all of this over time is what leads to the chronic disease. And like I said, when you stack it one on top of the next, it gets worse with time. And so most people in our society, thanks, Tina, most people in our society today don't think much of being on a pill for high cholesterol or high blood pressure or diabetes. Why? Because every other person is on medication for these conditions. And so it's just kind of become the norm. But what I want to say is it's not normal. And these are signs of metabolic dysfunction. If you have high blood pressure or high cholesterol or carrying that excess weight, and down the road, you're really, driving down the road to chronic disease, right? The heart attack, the stroke, all of those things. Okay. And here's another thing that I'll tell you is, like, when I took care of my patients, at the end of life, many of these people were dealing with these chronic illnesses for many years, right? Decades, 30, 40 decades. And guess what? Each of them was on medications for their diseases for 30, 40 years. Like, they've been on these medications for 30, 40 years. And so that just goes to show you that, don't have the expectation that when you're put on a pill for high cholesterol, high blood pressure, or heart disease, that it's actually treating the root cause. It's not. It's just a Band-Aid. It's just enough to make you feel good, control your symptoms, and kind of prevent disease progression. But it doesn't address the root cause of the disease, right? So that's really, really important to know. And, unfortunately, we are also living in a society where most people want the easy way out. But, I always like to tell my kids, nothing worth having is easy to get. And that includes health and vitality. It is something that we have to work towards and keep up with to live the life that we all envision, especially in retirement, right? All right, let's go next. All right, so what's insulin and insulin resistance? This is probably, let me make this bigger so you guys can see it. So insulin is one of the key hormones in our body. There's a lot of hormones in our body, but it's one of the key hormones in our body. Obviously, our body is very complex. Metabolic health is very complex. So I'm not going to try to go through all of that, but I'm just going to explain the basics of insulin, because it's something that, you hear a lot about, and it's important to know. what it does and how it's affected by our modern lifestyle. Because a lot of that is what affects our metabolic health. Okay. So insulin is, think of it like the key energy regulator in our body. So basically, every time you eat food, that food is broken down into sugar. And so then that raises your blood sugar. And insulin is the hormone that is responsible for taking that blood sugar and putting it inside your cells where your body can then use it for energy. So you see in the top left corner there, right? Insulin is like a key that opens the lock to the door for your cell to let the sugar in. Okay. And then again, your body needs the sugar to give you energy. So just like you put gas in your car, our body burns two types of fuels for energy. One is sugar from the food we eat usually, and some of it's also stored. And then the other is fat, also known as ketones, which we'll talk about next week when we talk about fasting. But here's the thing, insulin is super important. It's supposed to go up and it's supposed to go down. Right? It's every time we eat, it's supposed to go up so that it can take that sugar and put it in the cell. Because if, its main job is to make sure our blood sugar doesn't go too high or too low, right? Because either one of those is very dangerous for our health. So it wants to keep it just in a happy place, right? So what ends up happening though, is you can see here on the bottom left, right? How food, particularly, there's different parts of our lifestyle that impact how insulin works, but let's look at how food impacts us, right? So every time we eat, our blood sugar goes up. So then insulin has to go up. And then after a few hours, it goes down, but then it's time for a snack. So then we eat again, our blood sugar goes up. So then the body says, oh, got to bring that blood sugar down. So then it comes down again, and then we eat lunch, and then it goes up, and then we eat a snack, and then dinner, and up and down and up and down. And guess what? In our modern food environment, we're eating all the time. We're eating too much, and we're eating all the wrong foods. And we've talked about this in that the average American daily calories, 70% of them are coming from processed and ultra processed foods, probably the worst type of foods for our health that are making us sick, right? And so what ends up happening is, like, imagine you're standing next to the bass in a club, right? And at some point you feel like you've gone deaf because you can't hear anymore. Well, that's what happens with insulin resistance, is when your insulin constantly is going up and down and up and down, and at some point it just stays up because it can't keep up with that constant influx of sugar from us constantly eating all the time and eating all the wrong food. And so it kind of goes deaf. You can't hear anymore. And so it stops working, right? And so when it stops working, the little organ in your body called the pancreas, which is what makes insulin, says, oh no, I need more because the blood sugar is going up and we need to get it in the cells. But it can't, because your cells have now become resistant to the insulin. And this ends up leading to what we call then insulin resistance. And down the road, this can lead to lots and lots and lots of issues, right? And what are some of those issues, right? Some of those issues are, first of all, the symptoms, right? What are some of the symptoms of insulin resistance? Because if you go to your doctor with these symptoms, most of the time, they will say, oh, it's probably because you're not sleeping, or it's because you're stressed at work, or you're a parent, or, whatever. There'll be lots of excuses as to why you're having these symptoms. Brain fog, chronic fatigue, low energy, and drop it in the chat if these are things that you've experienced, right? Constant cravings, always hungry. No matter what you eat, you're hungry, right? The mood fluctuations, trouble managing your weight, right? And then at some point you get diagnosed with one of these silent killers, high cholesterol, pre-diabetes, high blood pressure, right? So like insulin resistance is the root cause of all of these symptoms that go on to become these silent killers that then go on, with metabolic dysfunction to heart disease and kidney disease and all of, the rest. And, our modern environment is making it worse. Our modern lifestyle is absolutely contributing to insulin resistance. Food is probably the number one thing, but it's more than just that. Our modern lifestyles, between the diet, between Netflix and chill, Most of us are spending more time in front of a screen at work and then at home in front of the TV, kids in front of tablets and TVs. And then we work in these competitive productivity-based work models, right? Where we're applauded for stress and we're applauded for not sleeping, right? All of this is like fuel to the fire for metabolic dysfunction. All of this makes it worse. And then on top of that, you compound the fact that, and I'm speaking from my own experience here, like most families today have 2 working parents. And now you're trying to parent and raise the next generation of children. And most of us are living far away from our families. So you have all the stress of parenting and, trying to navigate everyone's schedules. And I mean, this is literally a setup for a metabolic disaster, right? Our modern lifestyles. And then for women, it's even worse because then we approach perimenopause and menopause, and the hormone that was protecting us all this time, estrogen, starts going away. And then we're at even higher risk for metabolic dysfunction, even higher risk for insulin resistance and heart disease and dementia and, osteoporosis and all the things, right? So this is like a major problem and something that we can only address once we recognize that it's a problem versus just saying, oh, it's anxiety or it's just me parenting my children or it's just stress from work. It's not. It's all of that plus more, right? All right. So we're getting to the end here of what I want to tell you. So if you guys can think of any other questions that you might have about all of this, I know this is a lot, then please drop it in the chat. But what are we talked about this already actually. What are the key causes of insulin resistance? So poor diet, definitely number one, definitely the one that I'm most passionate about addressing because it's something that we're doing multiple times a day. Most of us, right? We're eating at least 3 meals a day. Some of us are even snacking. And so because it's something we're doing multiple times a day, being mindful of the food that we're eating, the kind of food that we're eating can make a huge impact on our metabolic health, right? Sedentary lifestyle. So here's the really cool thing about our muscle. So typically what insulin does is, when that blood sugar goes up after we eat, it usually takes that blood sugar and mostly stores it in the muscle and the liver, right? And so the muscle, however, has the ability to also suck up that blood sugar without needing insulin. And it makes it very special because, and it's like a glucose sink, right? A sugar sink. That's the best way to think about it. So that's why they say after you eat, go for a walk or do a little bit of exercise, because what ends up happening is now not only is insulin released to try to get that blood sugar down, but what the muscle is able to do is open up these channels that doesn't need any insulin, and it kind of sucks up all that blood sugar. And so any sort of movement after you eat is incredible to help optimize your blood sugar and then overall long-term your metabolic health. But in general, we're just not moving very much as a society. So even if it's not after you eat, just move. Whatever it is, in whatever form. People ask me all the time, what's the best type of exercise? The type you're going to do, right? So just move your body and get that exercise in. There was a study that just came out recently, which was absolutely amazing. And what it showed, I was sharing it on social media the other day, is that if we did just 10 squats every 45 minutes during an average workday, right? 8.5 hours, 9 hours, 10 squats every 45 minutes for 8.5 hours. That is better at regulating our blood sugar than a 30-minute walk. So it's really that simple, right? Set a timer for 45 minutes and every 45 minutes, get up and do 10 squats. And it's less painful, and you can literally do 10 squats in a matter of a minute, right? So it's the little things that compound and build up with time. Chronic stress. This one I could talk about forever, but the best way to think about it is our stress hormones, our cortisol and adrenaline, right? When those are really high, it tells our brain that we are in fight or flight mode. And we, like I told you guys at the beginning, we are primitive. Like our brain is very primitive. All I can think of is, if I'm in a stressed out state, there's a saber-toothed tiger that's coming to eat me, and I need to go. And so what it's going to tell the body is that, hey, you need to produce energy. I need energy. And then it's going to rev up all your hormones. Okay. So when cortisol and adrenaline are high, it's going to rev up insulin. It's going to rev up a lot of your other hormones to like kick your metabolism into high gear and get as much energy as possible. And so over time, chronic stress can lead to, really high levels of insulin, leading to insulin resistance, right? So that's another lifestyle factor that is really, really important to work on. So small changes made consistently go a long way. You guys hear me say this all the time. It's the little everyday habit that we are taking part in, right? So some of the things that I'm super passionate about: eating fiber-rich whole foods, right? Plants are rich in fiber, and we can talk more about this in the coming weeks. And there's a lot in your ebook about this. But basically what fiber does is it helps regulate your blood sugar, right? So instead of having rapid blood sugar spikes like this, when you're eating fiber-rich foods, the fiber, packages up that blood sugar. And so helps with digesting it slower and kind of prevents rapid spikes in your blood sugar, which is really good for your long-term blood sugar regulation. Also helps with cholesterol, also helps with managing weight, also helps keeping you full. Like it all kind of works together. So the more whole fiber-rich foods you can eat, the better. And obviously that's kind of where balance comes in. Balance, right, is a matrix of 7 different types of soluble and insoluble fibers. So eating that at the end of, before your biggest meal of the day, at the end of the day, is a great way to kind of protect yourself from that big, blood sugar spike right after eating your dinner. And remember, our metabolism is usually slower near the end of the day, so you're more likely to store that excess sugar, excess energy as fat, because most of us are not moving after dinner. Most of us are Netflixing and chilling, right? And most of us are snacking. So the balance is going to help you not snack, right? Movement, we talked about. Stress reduction, we talked about. Sleep. I'm reading a book right now called Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. Highly recommend. But if you sleep deprive someone, not only even just acute sleep deprivation, 24 hours of sleep deprivation, it can be the equivalent of being intoxicated with alcohol, but it also can make you insulin resistant very quickly. So that's a rapid way of making someone insulin resistant, either making them really stressed out or depriving them of sleep. So we don't think about sleep as being important, but people that have poor quality sleep, that are not, getting enough hours of sleep, between 7 to 9 hours, and not getting good quality sleep, are at higher risk of metabolic dysfunction, higher risk of diabetes, higher risk of cancer, higher risk of that excess weight and having difficulty losing that weight. So it's all compounding, right? It's all compounding. Fasting, we're going to talk about more next week about how that works. But fasting really helps to enhance what we call metabolic flexibility. That's your body's ability to use sugar that you're eating as fuel, as energy, but also your own stored fat as fuel, breaking down your own body's fat into ketones and using that as a secondary fuel. So when our bodies become really good at using sugar and ketones, we call that being metabolically flexible. And usually that means that we're metabolically healthy because we're able to use both. And fasting really helps with that. And then, of course, you guys know the Feel Great system because you guys are all using it. But all of these things have a stacking effect on each other. So I think that's all I have for you guys. We're just a little over the 30-minute mark, so I don't want to keep you guys too late. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, or any comments, anything you